Hello, my name is Kiriath and Archon Studios very kindly sent me a preview for Masters of the Universe Battleground, and naturally I did the only thing that I could possibly do when it comes to assembling and painting miniatures, which is to make it as grim and grimy and dark as possible. Which is possibly not the look you would typically associate with He-Man and Friends, but you know what? I know full well that they will have sent this to other people, and there will be amazingly talented painters and creators who will have been able to absolutely replicate the cartoons. They will have managed to make it so that it looks absolutely spot on, really hit that nostalgia, and I can't do that. And if I were to try and do that, it would look significantly worse than what I have done. So I approached it in my own way, if you like. And you know what? I actually had a really good time with this. This is a really fun box to put together and to paint. In terms of the box contents, you've got the Battleground itself to play on, you've got scenery, you've got the models, you've got the cards that dictate gear and fate and glory cards, and of course you've got dice. The final box will also have the rulebook, which is important, but my preview version had PDF versions of that, which I can't really chuck in front of the camera. That sounded terrible. Now this video is going to focus on the plastic within the box. There will be a separate one dealing with the gameplay, and I'll say straight off the bat that these miniatures were really nice to assemble. They were a lot of fun to assemble. They went together very, very cleanly for the most part. The plastic is a little harder than you might be used to if you are familiar with companies like Games Workshop, for instance, but it's still nice and easy to work with, and it does clean up well. It responds really well to plastic cement, and the models do go together nicely. The instructions are nice and clear, and for the most part, these things go together really well because they've been separated in, intelligent places. There are some kits out there where you go to put them together and you wonder why a certain part is separate, or you wonder why they've made the join area quite the way they have. There's a lot of fiddly kits out there. This is not one of those. And I found with most of the models, you couldn't really tell where any of the joins are. Now, I think for a couple of these, you could get away with doing sub-assembly painting if you really needed to, but I actually found that they were perfectly fine to paint completely assembled. The bases are nicely done, very clearly marked as to what is the front and centre of the model and what is the back of the model. And the overall quality of the sculpts, like the amount of detail, how they look, all of that is pretty top-notch. Now, all of the character models were painted on stream for me, and I really enjoyed painting them. As I said at the start, I went for something a bit darker, a bit more grim, a bit more gritty, which is not typically the style that you might do these miniatures in normally, but I'm one of those people who kind of has to stick with their strengths. I can do an okay grimy paint job, but I'm never going to be the kind of person who can pull off immaculate non-metallic metals and just completely be able to copy like cartoon styles. That being said, it was actually really nice painting these, and I think they took this scheme pretty well. All of them were painted in pretty much exactly the same way, which was to use a black base coat, and then dry brush grey, then dry brush white. That by itself is quite a good way of getting the lighting that you want for your models, but what I did from that point on was to use desaturated colours. Now normally you'd follow that up by using saturated colours of what you want to do, whether it be bright blues or bright greens, especially for this style of miniature. Instead of using something like GW's contrast paints or Army Painter speed paints, instead I used washes for the most part. I wanted to have the colour scheme be close to what you see in the official artwork, close to the cartoon, but I really did want it to be nice and desaturated, nice and dark. Washes was the best way to do that, so generally speaking, the cloth, the leather, that was all done using different washes. Metals I stuck with using metallic paints. I wanted there to be a little bit of bright here and there on the models just to properly emphasise all the bits that weren't bright. That being said, all of the metals were also knocked back using streaking grime, which had quite an outing when it came to these kits. Every character model, once it had all of the colours and all of the metals painted, did get a nice slathering of streaking grime, which was then followed by rubbing most of it away using white spirit. This is a pretty standard approach to doing kind of Grimdark painting, but it works really well, and I do like the effect that it leaves. You get all of that nice grimy detail in the recesses, but everything else retains the colour. It's a really fun technique, and it's applicable to pretty much anything if you want it to be. Anything that was appropriate to have a bit of blood on it had a bit of blood put on it, and metals were also hit with a bit of dirty down rust. Now, this frankly is something that deserves its own video. It's basically talent in a bottle. It's magic. It is pure magic. All it takes is just one brush, one coat, and it creates actual realistic rust. You may as well have told me a wizard made it. I have no idea how it works, but it works a treat, and it got some pretty heavy use for this lot. I painted all of the models for this box on stream, excluding the scenery, which was done extremely quickly using an airbrush. Did a simple coat of black, then white from the top, and then some turquoise from the top, with a little bit of detail in terms of metals, rust, and vines painted in as well. Also a bit of red for some banners, just to give a little burst of colour here and there. So when it comes to preparing this box for actually playing, when it comes to taking all the models off the sprues, putting them together, getting all the scenery off the sprues as well, the painting process, I really don't have any complaints about this box. As I've said before, the models are really nicely detailed, they're very nicely sculpted, they are instantly recognisable if you have any knowledge of He-Man and Masters of the Universe. They are really nicely done. I think the way they were separated on the sprues makes a lot of sense, and there wasn't really anything in the way of like random bits that you feel like shouldn't have been separate. There was none of that, it all made sense. The way they went together, I think especially it's worth emphasising when it comes to things like bare skin and stuff, and like cloth or clothes that are quite tight fitting or form fitting on models. Sometimes you can end up with really obvious join lines. For the most part, there were no real join lines on these. Very sensibly separated in a way that made sense and wasn't obvious after you'd put them together. Now, I will say with Ram Man and Triclops, there are some obvious joins on there, which I did try and fix, but without doing a bit of green stuff work or a bit of sprue or something, would have been a bit of a challenge. But those two were very much the exception to the rule. Everything else was super smooth. The scenery is really nicely detailed and really nicely put together. I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of painting scenery. I tend to either dry brush or airbrush it as quickly as possible. It's not an aspect of just hobbying in general that interests me all that much, but this scenery took my usual approach as well as pretty much anything else that Archon have done, in fairness. I approach all of their scenery the same way, whether it's for the Dungeons and Lasers stuff or Rampart. They get sprayed on the sprue, they then get painted on the sprue, then they get cut out and the sprue marks are painted over. This took that just as well as any of the others, and it feels super solid as well. It's nice, thick scenery. It doesn't feel flimsy. It feels like it could properly stand up to some punishment, which is good. Overall, miniatures-wise, contents-wise, I'm loving this box. It's great. Now, if you're interested in this, then it will be up for pre-order on the 26th of April. There's a bunch of links in the description that you can take a look at. And I, of course, would be remiss not to say thank you to Archon Studios for sending this over for me to take a look at. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And I apologise now for any childhoods that might have been ruined by the sight of He-Man covered in blood. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.